Hello and welcome to Droncom T. Today I'm going to show you how to paint this model, the student, from Senjutsu Battle for Japan by Stone Sword Games. So, the first thing I've done is I've primed the model with black. This will give us a nice even base coat for the rest of our colours to work off of. And the first thing I'm going to do is come in with Castilian green. I'm going to paint all of the robes on the model. Keep your paint nice and thin, and this will take a couple of coats to build up a solid cover of green all over those robes on the model. You don't need to worry about being too neat at this stage, but do try and keep it over just the robes of the model and catch them all with a couple of layers of Castilian green to build up to a nice solid base colour all over those robes. As you can see, it isn't giving fantastic coverage on the first layer, but by coming in with a second layer, we will build up to a nice solid green colour all over those robes. And after that first coat has dried, I'm coming back in with a second to really build up that coverage to get a nice solid, even base cover all over the robes of the model. By keeping the paint nice and thin, it won't obscure any of the detail on the miniature as we build up to that solid base colour all over those robes. And after a couple of coats, we've got a nice solid cover of Castilian green all over the fabric on the model. And now, with some Kislev flesh, I'm going to paint the skin to the model. As this is a very thin paint, it's going to take a couple of layers to build up a solid base cover, but just be nice and neat around the robe areas, and then a couple of thin layers build up to a solid layer of Kislev flesh all over the skin. Now at this point, the skin is going to look incredibly bright, but don't worry, we will be knocking this colour back with some shades later on to give it a much more natural skin tone. Don't forget the feet sticking out the bottom here. Although it does have sandals on, I'll be painting these at a later stage, so it doesn't matter if you get any Kislev flesh over any of the sandal parts to the model. And after a couple of coats of Kislev flesh, you can see we've really built a solid cover all over the skin areas to the model. And now with some Corvus black, I'm going to paint the hair and the scabbard on the model. So catch all of the hair with a coat of Corvus black, being nice and neat around the skin and the robes. I'm also going to paint the scabbard to his katana as well. And with that black applied, we've painted the hair and the scabbard to the model. So now with some corn red, I'm going to paint the belt and a couple of details. So first of all, I'm going to pick out this belt going around his waist. So it's got these bits here and they're coming down. So catch these with a couple of coats of corn red. I'm also going to pick out the strap holding his scabbard to his waist, as well as the handle to the katana. And he's got a hair tie in his hair, so I'm going to pick this out with some corn red as well. And with those details picked out, there's only a few more base coats left to apply. So now with some Rhinox hide, I'm going to pick out any leather details that are on the model. So for this, I'm going to pick out this wristband here on his arm. And he's also got a drinking flask here on his waist. So I'm going to pick this out with some Rhinox hide as well. With that Rhinox hide applied, that's the couple of leather details picked out on the miniature. So now with some Rawk flesh, I'm just going to pick out the little bit of strapping. So on his arm here, he's got some strapping going around his forearm. And there's also cross marking on the drinking bottle that I'm going to catch out with Rawk flesh as well. And finally, with some lead belcher, I'm just going to pick out any metallic details. So that's the hilt and crossguard to his katana. Just picking these out with a little bit of lead belcher. And with that lead belcher applied, that's the first step of base coats applied to the model. So the next step is we're going to do a little bit of shading. So the first shade I'm doing, I'm coming in with some Beal Tan Green. I'm going to apply this all over the green robes to the model. Try and avoid getting this over any areas that aren't the robes. And also, if you do find the shade is pooling anywhere, wick it away with a dry brush, just so it doesn't pool too heavily in the recesses. Now with some Agrax Earthshade, I'm going to apply this over the skin and the little bit of strapping on his arm as well. Once again, make sure this doesn't pull too heavily in all of the recesses, but cover all of that skin with some Agrax Earthshade so it works into those recesses and darkens down that skin to a much more natural tone. And finally, with some Nuln Oil, I'm going to shade the rest of the model. So that will be the hair, the belt, and the katana, and the Rhinox hide, with some Nuln Oil.
If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell.
And with those shades dried, you can see it's darkened down the model and added some definition into all of those recesses all over the miniature. First up, with some Castilian Green, I'm going to start highlighting the robes. So for this, with some nice thin down Castilian Green, I'm going to apply it to the raised areas on the model, but leaving the shade in all of the recesses. So here you can see I'm coming down these raised folds by his legs, but I'm leaving the shade paint in all of the recesses. So we're bringing that colour back and working towards our highlight. So just take your time at this step, work your way around the robes and all of the raised areas where the shade hasn't settled, come in with some thinned down Castilian Green to help bring it back up to its original colour. And with that Castilian Green applied, it's brought a little bit of colour back to the raised areas on the fabric. So next up, with a 50-50 mix of Castilian Green and Strachan Green, I'm going to apply this in the middle of the areas that we just applied the Castilian Green. So focus this towards the more raised points of all of the folds and creases. So we're working our way up towards that edge highlight and adding a transition on the robes from darkest to lightest. So keep this nice and thin so it allows some of the previous colours to show through and the transition isn't too stark as we work our way up towards our brightest highlights. So once again, just take your time, work your way around the model, and in the middle of where we applied all of our previous step, apply some of this mix on top. And with that mix applied, it's brightened up the most raised areas of the fabric. And now with some pure Strachan green, I'm going to apply an edge highlight on all the sharpest points of the fabric. So this is the top of every fold, every crease, every sharp line. Just apply a thin edge highlight of pure Strachan green on the most raised point. Keep these lines nice and thin and they'll just act as a point highlight where the light would catch on the sharpest folds. So just take your time, work your way around the model and apply a thin edge highlight of Strachan green on all the most pronounced folds of the miniature. And with that edge highlight applied, that is all the robes painted and highlighted. So next up, I'm coming back in with some corn red again. I'm going to apply this all over the areas we painted red before. So once again, I'm leaving the shade in the recesses and just catching the raised areas with a little bit of corn red just to bring it back up to its original colour. With some corn red again, it's brought some of those areas back up to their colour, which will allow us to apply our final highlight. So with some Evil Sun Scarlet, just going to catch the most raised points of the belt, giving them an edge highlight. And on the handle to the sword, I'm going to add some scratchy marks to look like strapping. And with that applied, that is the belt and katana highlighted. So next, I'm going to highlight the skin. So for this, I'm coming back in with Kislev Flesh again. I'm going to pick the most raised details and give them an edge highlight. So it's things here like the tip of his nose, the eyebrows, the bottom lip and the chin, as well as the cheekbones and any pronounced muscles or raised points on the rest of the skin. Because of the way the shade paint has worked, it's darkened down the skin and given us that definition in the recesses, so we don't need to come through and do all the multiple steps to highlight the skin. Just this Kislev Flesh spot highlight will work to give us a really nice looking skin. And with it applied, you can see that skin's now got lots of interest and tonal definition all over it. So now with some Abaddon Black, I'm going to start painting the eyes on the model. So with a small brush, I'm coming in and just sinking some of this Abaddon Black into the eye socket, being nice and neat, trying to not get this over any other area than all we want. And with some white scar, I'm going to come in and put a line within the black we just applied. And it's nice and small, nice and neat, keeping it in the middle of that black we just applied. Finally, with some Abaddon black again, coming back in and adding a small vertical line in the middle of the white, which will act like a pupil. And with the eyes painted, that is the skin and the face painted on the miniature. So now with some Mechanica Standard Grey, I'm going to highlight the scabbard to the sword. So for this, I'm just giving it an edge highlight on any of the raised, pronounced areas on the black part to the katana. And with a dry brush, I'm lightly going over the hair just to catch the raised strands and add some definition to the hair. And with the scabbard and hair highlighted, the model's really starting to come together now. So next, with some Gorthor Brown, I'm going to highlight the couple of leather details we painted. So just giving an edge highlight to the edge of this wristband and the drinking bottle on his waist, and catching some raised details with some Gorthor Brown. And with that leather highlighted, there's only a couple more details to highlight on the model. So now with some pallid witch flesh, I'm going to come in and highlight the strapping on his arm and the strapping on the water bottle as well. And now with that strapping highlighted, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move on and start painting the details on his base. So for this, I'm coming in with some Dryad bark, and I'm going to paint the wood all over the base. Also be nice and careful when I get around his feet. Don't want to paint any of this over the skin we've painted and highlighted on his feet, but work this into all of the recesses on the wooden panels to the boards on the base. This may take a couple of coats to get a solid cover. With that Dryad bark applied, we've painted the wooden base on the model. And now with some Nuln Oil, I'm going to shade all over the base. Let's again work this into all of the recesses on those wooden boards. Be nice and careful to avoid getting it over his feet. And once that Nuln Oil is dried, you can see it's added some definition onto those boards on the floor. And now with some Baneblade Brown, I'm going to dry brush all over those boards just to help them stand out and add some detail. Once again, be nice and careful around the feet of the model. Just catch the boards with a dry brush of Baneblade Brown. And once that dry brush is applied, that is the base to the miniature painted. So now with some Mournfang Brown, I'm going to paint the sandals on his feet. Just catch out the sandal details with a couple of coats of Mournfang Brown. The reason we're doing this now is so we didn't catch these with the dry brush on the base. So it means that we can come back in, paint them now. We didn't have to worry about accidentally painting them over them while we were painting the floor. To be nice and neat at this stage, you don't want to get this over the floor or over any of the skin we've already painted, but just catch those sandals with a couple of coats of Mournfang Brown. And once that Mournfang Brown has dried, that's the sandals picked out, We're just going to give them a quick highlight just to bring out the details. So for that, I'm coming through with some Scrag Brown. Just going to give them a thin edge highlight on all the sharpest points of those sandals. Once again, be nice and neat at this stage. Don't want to get this over any other details, but just catch the edges to the sandals with a thin edge highlight of Scrag Brown. With that Scrag Brown applied, there's only a few more details left to pick out on this miniature. So now with some Storm Hose Silver, I'm going to pick out a couple of metallic details. So I'm just going to give the hilt and the crossguard of his katana a quick edge highlight. With those metal details picked out, the next thing I'm going to do is paint the little marker on the front of his base. So for this I'm coming in with some Celestial Grey. I'm going to base coat that triangle with a couple of coats of Celestial Grey. And this triangle is a marker for direction for while playing the game, so I just want it to stand out with a nice white marker to make gameplay easier. And once that Celestial Grey has dried, just going to pick it out with a thin edge highlight of White Scar just to really emphasise the directional point to that triangle. And with the directional marker painted, there's only one last thing left to do to the model, and that will be to paint the rim of the base just to tidy it up. So for this I'm coming in with some Abaddon Black. I'm just going to paint the rim of the base to give it a nice solid black colour and really tidy up the base. Now be nice and careful with this, you don't want to get this over any of the wooden flooring we've already painted and highlighted, but just catch the rim of the base with a couple of coats of Abaddon Black. And with the rim painted, that is the student for Senjutsu Battle for Japan painted. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please let me know in the comments down below. Have you ever played this game? Do you have any interest in playing the game? And thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and happy painting!